This is the screencast for Lesson 12 of Stephen's C# 24-hour trainer. This lesson talked about debugging and debugging techniques, and in this try it, you get to debug this application. So here's the program. Let's just run it to see what happens for starters. If I click calculate, it's supposed to calculate the costs for each of these three entrees and calculate a total. And it doesn't take very long to notice that there's a pretty big problem here. One tofu dinner at $13.95 each should not cost $142.65. If you look a little more closely, you'll see that that's the same value as this, the cost of the chicken. So that may be a little bit of a hint as to what's going wrong. But let's just go into the code and see what we can learn using debugging techniques. So somewhere the problem is inside this calculate button. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set a breakpoint near where I think the error might occur. In this case, the tofu cost is wrong, the total tofu cost, which is right there. So we could set a breakpoint here. You could also set a breakpoint up here at the very beginning and just walk through the entire routine to see how things go. Let's start with that. So here's the program again. I'll click the button. Control runs to this point and then stops. And we can hover over these variables and see what's going on. For instance, num chicken initially is 0. That's because we haven't executed this statement yet. It hasn't gotten a value. So I'm going to press F10 to step through the first three lines. And now I can hover over here. Num chicken 9, num steak 12, num tofu 1. Those are correct, if I remember correctly. Now we're going to do our calculation to calculate the results. We set total equal to 0. Step over that statement, verify it is 0. Now I'm going to calculate decimal price for the chicken. That's going to be the chicken cost times the number of chicken items, giving us $142.65. That seems reasonable. Total is $142.65. Let's step over the steak calculation. Price is $18.95 times 12 steaks. The result is $227.40. That's reasonable. The total is now $370.05. That seems all pretty reasonable. Let's step over the tofu calculation. $13.95 each times 1 tofu. Our price for the tofu selection is $13.95. That's correct, and that's not what's being displayed in that text box. Total is $384. That's believable. Now you can verify these calculations in greater detail if you suspect they're wrong. At this point, I'm really looking just for the problem with the tofu calculation. So if the total price looks vaguely reasonable, I'm going to accept it for now. That means we still have further debugging to do, but it's a start. So let's just step through this code. This is the one that is causing us trouble. If I hover over the text property, it says $142.65. So that was set incorrectly, and now it's pretty obvious why. If I look over here, I was accidentally setting the tofu price text box to show the chicken's price. So I'm just going to change that to the tofu price. Now, to see if that fix worked, you can restart the program or just run and click the calculate button again, or in this case I can just right click on that line of code and select set next statement, or I believe you can press Control Shift F10 to set the next statement. And I'll step through that line again. Now let's see if the text box is now showing $13.95 correctly. So let's run the program, and there we are. That bug is now fixed. Now it's practically an axiom in programming that any program is going to have bugs in it, even fairly simple ones like this one. So we should do some more testing to make sure that things are correct. So one way to help test is to zero out everything except for one parameter and then see what result you get. So I'm going to get rid of my debugging statements here. I'll go up to the debug menu and select delete all breakpoints and then run. So now we can look at this. One chicken dinner at $15.95 is $15.85. Okay, so there's another bug. Let's go back in and figure out what's going wrong here. I'll set a breakpoint here. We'll click calculate and let's get started just like we did before. So I'll step over those three lines. Num chicken is 1. That's correct, and that seems reasonable. Step over the chicken calculation. Price chicken is $15.85. That's not correct. So let's look at what we're multiplying the cost. Oh, there's the problem. It says $15.85, and I believe it was supposed to be $15.95. Num chicken is correct. So the real problem is that this constant was set incorrectly. It should be 1595. If I make that change and run the program, I did not go back to that line, so it's using the old value in that calculation. Let me do the calculation again, get rid of this breakpoint and run, see what happens. And now we have 1595 as we desired. So now let's check the other calculations. We'll make that a 0, we'll make this one a 1. Calculate steak is now 1 at 1895 is good. Let's do a tofu calculation. 1 tofu at 1395 gives 1395. That's also good. So at least as far as I can tell with these tests, this program is working correctly, and we're done. Now notice, however, just as one last detail, I made 2 changes to this code while I was in debug mode. If you look up here, you'll see there's an asterisk next to this file indicating there are unsaved changes. So if you make changes like this, be sure you save them fairly quickly so something weird doesn't happen, the program doesn't crash and you lose all your changes. So I'll just save those. Or if you run the program again, it'll automatically save the changes and you won't have to worry about them.